Most days, Elias Carter rode his hand-restored vintage motorcycle in peaceful anonymity. Just another elderly black man in a small town where people looked right through him. At 72, the Vietnam veteran had learned to move through America, invisibly his war medals and sacrifice buried by time and indifference. Then came the morning when Officer Denton's cruiser screamed to a halt behind him, a confrontation captured by cell phones as the hot-headed cop forced the dignified veteran to kneel on sun-baked asphalt. "You don't know who I am," Elias warned, softly, blood trickling from his lip as Denton mocked his military ID. The officer's smirk vanished minutes later, when 6 military Humvees appeared on the horizon, soldiers pouring out to surround the man Denton had humiliated. Nobody realized they'd just witnessed the first shot in Elias Carter's final battle. Not for battlefield glory, but for the respect America had denied its forgotten heroes. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The early morning sun painted golden streaks across the quiet country road as Elias Carter eased his vintage motorized bike onto the smooth asphalt. The machine purred beneath him, a testament to the decade he'd spent restoring it piece by piece in his modest garage. His weathered hands gripped the handlebars with the same steady confidence they'd held rifles with 50 years ago. The Vietnam vet cap on his head was faded from years of wear, but he wouldn't trade it for anything, not when it had traveled with him through hell and back. At 72, Elias moved with a deliberate calm that came from surviving things most people couldn't imagine. His morning rides were sacred, time to breathe, to remember, and to feel the wind against his face. As he cruised down the winding road, he raised a hand to wave at Mrs. Peterson tending her garden, and nodded to old Frank Wilson collecting his mail. Small-town rituals, comforting in their predictability. The bike itself was a conversation starter, a 1965 BSA Lightning, lovingly rebuilt with parts he'd hunted down from across 3 states. The black paint gleamed under the morning light, chrome fixtures catching the sun. To Elias, it wasn't just transportation, it was therapy, a way to keep his hands busy and his mind focused when the memories grew too loud. He was rounding a gentle curve when the first wail of sirens cut through his peaceful reverie. The sound sparked an instinctive tension in his shoulders, a soldier's reflex that 5 decades of civilian life hadn't erased. Glancing in his small side mirror, Elias spotted the white and blue patrol cruiser speeding up behind him, lights flashing aggressively against the pastoral backdrop. With practiced patience, Elias signaled and eased the vintage bike to the shoulder, kicking down the stand and settling the machine into place. He removed his riding gloves methodically, folding them into his jacket pocket. No sudden movements, a habit born from too many encounters where his blackness made others assume the worst. The cruiser screeched to a halt behind him, and Elias watched in his mirror as the driver's door flew open with unnecessary force. Officer Denton emerged with his hand already resting on his holstered weapon, swagger evident in every step. Tall and broad-shouldered with close-cropped blonde hair, Denton wore his uniform like armor and his authority like a weapon. "Stay where you are," Denton barked, approaching with caution that bordered on theatrical. His mirrored sunglasses reflected Elias's own image back at him, an older black man sitting calmly on a vintage bike. Elias remained perfectly still, hands visible, on his thighs. "Good morning, officer," he offered, voice steady and respectful. Denton circled him once, eyes scanning the bike with open suspicion. Without preamble or greeting, he launched straight into accusation. "You steal that bike, old man? Got no plates on it?" The question hung in the air like a slap. Elias took a measured breath before responding, keeping his tone even despite the disrespect. "No, sir, I did not. This is a 1965 BSA Lightning street legal vintage. I've owned her for over 40 years. He reached slowly toward his jacket. "My registration is—" "Keep your hands where I can see them," Denton snapped, cutting him off. His hand tightened on his weapon. "This piece of junk on wheels looks suspicious. We've had reports of stolen vehicles in the area." Behind Denton, a second officer emerged from the passenger side of the cruiser. Officer Morales was younger, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, her expression carefully neutral as she assessed the situation. She hung back, allowing Denton to take the lead. "I assure you, officer, everything's in order," Elias said. "With your permission, I'd like to show you my registration and license." Denton ignored the request, instead circling the bike again, prodding at various parts with his nightstick. The metal tip clanged against the chrome exhaust pipes that Elias had polished just yesterday. "Careful with that, please," Elias said quietly, watching the nightstick scratch against his handwork. "You deaf or just playing dumb?" Denton snapped, looking up sharply. "I'll handle this how I see fit." Elias felt a familiar heaviness settle in his chest. He'd lived through this scene too many times in his 7 decades, the assumption of guilt, the immediate disrespect, the power flexed without cause. With slow, deliberate movements, he reached for his phone in his front pocket. "I'm going to record this interaction, officer," he stated calmly. Denton moved faster than Elias anticipated. With a swift motion, he knocked the phone from Elias's hand, sending it clattering onto the asphalt where the screen cracked against the rough surface. "That's destruction of personal property," Elias noted, his voice still calm, though his heart rate had picked up. The soldier in him was calculating exits, angles, threats, a survival mechanism that had never quite shut off. By now, a small group of passers-by had noticed the confrontation. A young woman across the street had her phone out, recording. An elderly white couple slowed their walking pace, watching with concern. A pickup truck pulled over, and the driver, a man in his 30s, began filming as well. Denton noticed the audience and his posture stiffened further. "Turn those off," he shouted at the bystanders. "This is police business." When no one complied, Denton turned his frustration back to Elias. "Get off the bike, now!" Elias complied, swinging his leg over with the deliberate movements of a man who'd learned to live with old injuries. He stood straight-backed despite the arthritis in his knees, a military bearing that had become second nature. "On your knees," Denton ordered, the command dripping with unnecessary force. Elias hesitated, dignity warring with self-preservation. "Officer, I'm 72 years old with 2 artificial knees. Kneeling is difficult for me." "I said on your knees," Denton repeated, louder this time, hand moving to his taser. Slowly, painfully, Elias lowered himself to the ground, using the bike for support. The gravel bit into his knees through his worn jeans. The position sent shooting pain through his joints, old wounds from a war most had forgotten protesting the indignity. Denton began roughly patting him down, hands invasive and aggressive. "You people think your little war stories give you a pass?" he sneered, close enough that Elias could smell the coffee on his breath. "Around here, respect is earned." Elias looked up, meeting Denton's gaze through the mirrored sunglasses. "I earned mine long before you were born, son." The word son triggered something in Denton, his face flushed red, jaw clenching visibly. "You watch your mouth," he hissed, grabbing Elias's arm with bruising force. Officer Morales finally stepped forward, discomfort evident in her posture. "Denton," she said quietly. "He's not resisting." "Stay out of this, rookie," Denton shot back, without looking at her. "This is how you show dominance with these types. You go soft, they walk all over you." Morales fell silent but remained tense, her eyes darting between Elias and the growing crowd of onlookers. Denton stepped back and pulled out his radio, making a show of calling in to dispatch. "Unit 327 reporting possible stolen vintage motorcycle. No plates! Suspicious individual refusing to cooperate." He looked directly at Elias as he fabricated the report, a small smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. Elias felt a cold anger settle in his bones. Not the hot rage of youth, but something deeper and more focused. "Officer," he said quietly, "you don't know who I am, and that's going to be a problem for you." Denton laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Is that a threat?" "No, sir. Just a fact." Denton reached down and roughly extracted Elias's wallet from his back pocket, flipping it open. He pulled out the military ID card Elias still carried. His eyes scanned it briefly before his smirk widened. "Well, well. Majestic Major Elias Carter, huh?" He waved the ID card mockingly. "Well, guess. What, this ain't a parade and I ain't saluting." With deliberate disrespect, Denton spat on the ground near Elias's feet. the glob of saliva landing inches from his hand. By now, Elias's lip was bleeding slightly where he'd been roughed up during the search. A thin trickle of red made its way down his chin, but he made no move to wipe it away. Instead, he looked steadily at Denton, something unreadable in his deep brown eyes. "You'll want to call your captain," Elias said, his voice dropping to a tone that had once commanded men through the jungles of Vietnam, "because in a few minutes you're going to need more than that badge to hide behind." Denton scoffed, but Morales tilted her head, listening. There was a sound in the distance, a low rumbling that seemed to be growing steadily louder. "What the hell is that?" Denton asked, distracted enough to draw his weapon as he looked toward the source of the noise. Morales took several steps back, her eyes widening as she spotted something approaching around the bend in the road. "Denton," she said, urgency in her voice. "Denton, you need to see this." The ground beneath them began to vibrate, a deep, mechanical tremor that Elias recognized immediately. His expression didn't change, but something like vindication flickered in his eyes. The rumbling grew to a thunderous roar as 6 Humvees appeared around the curve, moving in perfect formation. Behind them came an armored personnel carrier, followed by several black SUVs with government plates. The convoy slowed as it approached the scene, the lead Humvee pulling to a stop less than 30 feet from where Elias knelt on the asphalt. The crowd of bystanders had grown, phones raised to capture the unexpected development. Whispers rippled through the onlookers as the vehicles came to a stop in coordinated precision. Denton stood frozen, his weapon still drawn, but now hanging uselessly at his side. "What the fuck?" he muttered, his earlier confidence evaporating. Troops began dismounting from the vehicles, men and women in full military gear moving with disciplined efficiency. They quickly formed a perimeter, surrounding the area without a word. Their faces were professionally blank, but their positioning made it clear they were there for Elias. The door of the lead Humvee opened, and Captain Andrew Hale stepped out. Tall and imposing in his full dress uniform, complete with medals and insignia that spoke of distinguished service, Hale carried himself with the quiet authority of a natural leader. His dark skin contrasted with the crisp whiteness of his gloves as he adjusted them, taking in the scene with a quick tactical assessment. Without hesitation or uncertainty, Hale walked directly toward Elias, passing Denton as though he were invisible. He stopped precisely in front of the kneeling veteran and snapped to attention, executing a perfect salute. "Major Carter, sir," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence that had fallen over the scene. The shock on the faces of the onlookers was palpable. Officer Morales covered her mouth with one hand, eyes wide with realization. Denton's swagger had completely vanished, replaced by confusion that rapidly transformed into panic as he processed what was happening. "At ease, Captain," Elias responded, his voice steady despite his position. 2 soldiers immediately stepped forward, helping Elias to his feet with respectful support. The contrast between their treatment and Denton's earlier handling was stark and obvious to everyone watching. Hale turned to face Denton, his expression cold and controlled. "You've just assaulted one of the most decorated living veterans of this country. Stand down immediately." Denton's face flushed red again, but now with embarrassment rather than anger. Still, he attempted to salvage his authority. "This is police jurisdiction," he stammered, gesturing vaguely with his badge. "You have no right to interfere with—" "And this is my officer," Hale cut him off sharply. "You're on camera." He nodded toward the multiple phones recording the interaction. "Want to keep digging?" The standoff between Captain Hale and Officer Denton created an electric tension in the air. Elias stood slightly behind Hale now, his posture straight despite the pain in his knees, his dignity restored by the unexpected arrival of the military convoy. "Sir," one of the soldiers said to Elias, offering him a handkerchief for his bleeding lip. Elias accepted it with a nod of thanks. Hale hadn't broken eye contact with Denton. "We've been watching how your department treats our veterans," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying. "Today just confirmed our worst fears." Denton's hand tightened on his weapon, his knuckles white. "You can't just roll in here with military vehicles and take over a police matter." "Actually," Hale replied, "I can. Special directive from the Joint Chiefs countersigned by the governor. He pulled out a folded document from his breast pocket and held it up. Would you like to read it, or should I call your superiors to explain why you're harassing a man who's served this country for over 5 decades? More vehicles were arriving now. Unmarked cars with government plates, a media van with satellite equipment, even a motorcycle escort of veterans in leather jackets, emblazoned with military insignia. The small country road was quickly becoming crowded with supporters and spectators. The soldiers who had formed the perimeter began to approach, creating a protective circle around Elias. They were diverse, men and women of various races, ages, and backgrounds, but all moved with the same disciplined respect. One of them, a young black woman with sergeant's stripes, knelt to retrieve Elias's fallen Vietnam vet cap from the ground. She dusted it off carefully before presenting it to him. "Your cap, sir," she said, holding it out with both hands. Elias took it with a small nod. "Thank you, Sergeant." As he placed the cap back on his head, a ripple of recognition seemed to pass through the growing crowd. Phones were raised higher, cameras zoomed in, and whispers intensified. Someone in the back called out, "That's Major Carter, the one from the Tay Ninh Province rescue." Hale turned to address the onlookers, his voice pitched to carry without shouting. "This man," he said, gesturing to Elias, "led soldiers through hell while others ran. He saved 43 lives in a single night during the Tet Offensive. He's built homes for homeless veterans, trained officers at West Point, saved countless lives through his outreach programs. And this is how he's repaid." The crowd's murmuring grew louder, many faces turning toward Denton with expressions ranging from disgust to outright anger. Denton's radio crackled to life, and a voice demanded an update on the situation. He fumbled with it, eyes darting between Hale, Elias, and the circle of soldiers now surrounding them. "I need backup at mile marker 47, he said into the radio, voice cracking slightly. "Military personnel interfering with police business." Almost immediately, a black SUV pulled up beside the police cruiser. A stern-faced woman in a sharp suit stepped out, badge already in hand. "FBI Special Agent Lisa Warren," she announced, approaching Denton directly. "There won't be any backup, Officer Denton. Your captain has been briefed on the situation." Morales, who had been watching the scene unfold with growing horror, finally stepped forward. "Agent Warren, I'd like to make a statement about Officer Denton's conduct prior to your arrival." Denton shot her a venomous look. "Shut your mouth, rookie. That sounds like witness intimidation to me," Hale observed mildly. "Wouldn't you agree, Agent Warren?" Warren nodded, making a note on her tablet. "Officer Morales, we'll take your statement formally back at your station. For now," she turned to Denton, hand extended, "I'll need your badge and service weapon. Pending internal investigation." "This is bullshit," Denton protested. But the fight had gone out of him. He unclipped his badge and handed it over with visible reluctance. While this exchange took place, more soldiers had approached Elias. They greeted him with respectful salutes or quiet words of thanks. One older veteran with a prosthetic leg simply clasped Elias's hand in both of his, eyes shining with emotion. "You remember Jackson, sir?" the man asked. "You pulled him out of that rice paddy in '68. I was right behind you." Recognition dawned in Elias's eyes. "Reynolds," he said softly. "Daniel Reynolds. You made it home." "Thanks to you, sir," Reynolds replied, voice thick with feeling. Similar reunions were happening all around as more veterans emerged from vehicles to greet Elias. It was becoming clear that this was no random military convoy. These were men and women whose lives had been touched by Elias Carter in one way or another, spanning generations of service. Captain Hale watched these interactions with quiet satisfaction before turning back to the situation at hand. "Agent Warren, we have video evidence of Officer Denton's conduct today, as well as testimonies from multiple witnesses regarding a pattern of similar behavior." Warren nodded briskly. "We'll handle it from here, Captain. My team has been monitoring this department for months." She glanced at Elias. "Major Carter's incident today simply accelerated our timeline." Denton, now disarmed and badgeless, stood with his hands clenched at his sides. His face had gone from red to pale, realization dawning that his career was effectively over. You set this up, he accused Elias. You planned this whole thing. Elias didn't respond directly. Instead, he walked slowly toward his bike, the circle of soldiers parting to let him pass. He ran a hand over the vintage machine, checking for damage from Denton's nightstick. Only when he'd completed his inspection did he turn to face Denton. Next time, he said quietly, know who you're talking to. The simplicity of the statement seemed to hit Denton harder than any threat could have. He stood speechless as Morales was escorted to a separate vehicle to give her statement, and as Agent Warren directed other FBI personnel to secure the scene. Hale approached Elias again, speaking in a lower voice now. Sir, we have transport ready if you'd prefer not to ride. Elias shook his head. I'll ride my own way back, Captain, but I appreciate the escort. Of course, sir. Hale nodded, then hesitated. Sir, about the forgotten line, the network is growing faster than we anticipated. After today, recruitment will likely spike. Elias's expression revealed nothing, but he gave a small nod. We'll discuss it at the base. For now, let's clear these good people out of the road. They've seen enough drama for one morning. Hale began issuing orders, and the soldiers returned to their vehicles with practiced efficiency. The media van, which had been capturing everything, received a special instruction from an FBI agent. Footage would be held for 24 hours before release, standard procedure for incidents involving national security figures. As Elias prepared to mount his vintage bike again, a young boy broke away from his mother in the crowd, running up to the veteran before anyone could stop him. Sir, the boy said, breathless with excitement, are you a real hero? Elias looked down at the child, no more than 8 or 9, with wide eyes full of wonder. He knelt slowly, painfully, to bring himself to the boy's level. No, son, he said gently. I'm just an old soldier who did what needed doing. The real heroes are the ones who never came home. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a worn challenge coin from his unit. He pressed it into the boy's palm. You remember that, you hear? Remember the ones who didn't come back? The boy nodded solemnly, clutching the coin. His mother approached, apologizing for the interruption, but Elias waved it away with a smile. No harm done, ma'am. As he straightened up again, his eyes met Denton's across the scene. The officer stood isolated now, watched by FBI personnel, his career and reputation in tatters. There was no triumph in Elias's gaze, no gloating, just a weary recognition of a battle that should never have been necessary. With Captain Hale's assistance, Elias mounted his bike again. The engine came to life with a well-tuned rumble. The military convoy reorganized itself, forming an escort position around him. Humvees ahead and behind, motorcycles flanking. Agent Warren approached one last time. Major Carter, we'll need your formal statement. You'll have it, Elias assured her. But first I need to ride. The day's still young and I've got places to be. As the procession prepared to depart, bystanders began to applaud spontaneously. The sound spread until the quiet country road echoed with it, not just for the dramatic confrontation they'd witnessed, but for something deeper. Something about justice long delayed, but not denied. Something about respect earned through sacrifice. Elias didn't acknowledge the applause. He simply adjusted his Vietnam vet cap, nodded to Captain Hale, and eased his vintage bike forward. The convoy moved with him, a protective formation around a single rider on a hand-restored bike. Behind them, Officer Denton watched them go, the ruins of his career settling around him like dust. The military convoy escorting Elias merged onto the highway, a striking procession of government vehicles surrounding one elderly man on a vintage motorcycle. As they traveled, memories flooded Elias's mind, not just of the morning's confrontation, but of a lifetime of battles fought on foreign soil and at home, the Tay Ninh province of Vietnam, the air thick with humidity and the scent of cordite. Young. Lieutenant Elias Carter moved through dense jungle foliage, every sense heightened to the breaking point. Gunfire erupted ahead, the unmistakable crack of AK-47s cutting through the constant drone of insects. His unit had been separated from the main force Communications down, with wounded men who wouldn't survive a prolonged firefight. "Williams, take point," Elias whispered, his voice barely audible over the sounds of distant combat. "Johnston, help me with Peterson." The wounded soldier, barely 19, fresh-faced despite the grime of battle, had taken shrapnel to his leg. Blood soaked through the makeshift bandage, but the kid hadn't made a sound beyond the occasional sharp intake of breath. "I got you, sir," Johnston murmured, helping to lift Peterson onto Elias's back. Elias took the weight without complaint, though his muscles screamed in protest. "We move as one. Anyone falls behind, we all stop. Clear?" The small group of soldiers nodded, exhaustion and fear etched into their young faces. They trusted him implicitly, this officer who fought alongside them rather than from behind. What followed was 6 hours of grueling evasion and survival. Elias carried Peterson the entire time, even when enemy fire rained down around them. When they finally reached the extraction point, Elias was the last to board, ensuring every one of his men made it to safety first. "You saved my life," Peterson had said later in a field hospital that reeked of antiseptic and death. "Why'd you risk yourself like that?" Elias had simply shrugged. "Same reason you would have done it for me." 3 months later, the truth about Operation Rolling Thunder came to light. Civilian casualties, orders ignored, war crimes covered up by high-ranking officers who'd never set foot on the ground. Elias had been called to testify. "Major Carter," the stern-faced general had asked, "are you suggesting that Colonel Richardson deliberately targeted the civilian hospital?" Elias had stood ramrod straight, unflinching. "I'm not suggesting anything, sir. I'm stating it as fact. I heard the order myself and I saw the aftermath." His testimony had sealed his fate. The military machine closed ranks around its highest officers, and Elias became the scapegoat, branded unpatriotic, demoted, and eventually discharged dishonorably. His medals were stripped, his service record altered, his sacrifices erased from official history. The present-day convoy took an exit off the main highway, heading toward a sprawling military installation hidden from public view. As they approached the gates, Elias's mind continued its journey through the past. A small southern town where nobody knew his name. Elias had disappeared there after his discharge, working under the name James Cooper at a local auto repair shop. His hands, once steady enough to field strip a rifle blindfolded, now rebuilt engines and fixed transmissions. The work was honest, the pay modest, and most importantly, no one asked questions about his past. It was there he'd met Thomas Grant, a homeless Vietnam veteran sleeping in an abandoned car behind the shop. The man was rail-thin, jumpy, plagued by nightmares that left him screaming in the dead of night. "They don't want us around," Grant had told him one evening as they shared a bottle of cheap whiskey. "We remind them of what they sent us to do." Elias had nodded, understanding the unspoken truth. "Got a spare room," he'd offered casually. "Bed's better than a car seat." That spare room became the first safe house of what would eventually be called the Forgotten Line, a network of veterans helping veterans when the country that sent them to war turned its back. As the convoy pulled through the security checkpoint, Captain Hale rode alongside Elias's motorcycle, his expression respectful but concerned. "Sir, we've got confirmation that Cole is monitoring the situation. His team was seen near your property this morning." Elias nodded, unsurprised. Derek Cole had been a shadow in his life for decades, first as a CIA handler during the war, then as the man tasked with ensuring Elias's testimony never gained traction. Now, as the head of a shadowy private intelligence firm with government contracts, Cole represented everything Elias had fought against: power without accountability, patriotism as a shield for corruption. The convoy came to a stop in front of a nondescript building on the base. Soldiers formed a respectful corridor as Elias dismounted, his movement still fluid despite his age and the morning's rough treatment. Inside, a war room had been established. Maps covered the walls, screens displayed surveillance footage, and a dozen officers stood at attention as Elias entered. At the center of it all was a three-dimensional model of what appeared to be a nationwide network. Red lines connecting, points across all 50 states. The forgotten line, sir, Hale said, gesturing to the model. As of this morning, we have over 10,000 veterans actively involved, with support cells in every major city. Elias approached the model, studying it with critical eyes. And Cole? A young intelligence officer stepped forward, tablet in hand. His surveillance operation has expanded, sir. We've identified at least 30 agents embedded in various police departments across the country. The incident this morning wasn't random. Officer Denton has been on Cole's payroll for 18 months. Elias wasn't surprised. They're getting desperate, he observed quietly. Another figure stepped from the shadows at the back of the room. A tall black woman in her 40s with Elias's same determined eyes and strong jawline. Renee Carter wore a tailored suit and carried herself with the confidence of someone used to commanding attention in courtrooms. "That's because you're winning, Dad," she said, her voice carrying a complex mixture of pride and concern. "The Senate hearing is in 3 weeks. If your testimony goes public, half the Pentagon's old guard could face charges." Elias turned to his daughter, his expression softening slightly. They hadn't spoken in person for nearly 2 years. Not since he'd refused her plea to drop his crusade and live out his remaining years in peace. "Renee," he acknowledged with a small nod. "Didn't expect to see you here. When the FBI called to say my father was being harassed by a corrupt cop, I figured it might be time to put our differences aside," she replied, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Their relationship had fractured long ago when Elias's constant battles against the system had left little room for family. Renee had grown up with a father often absent, physically present but mentally still fighting in jungles halfway around the world. "The FBI called you directly?" Elias asked, his tactical mind immediately assessing this new information. "I've been working with them on the case against Cole for months," Renee admitted. "What happened today just accelerated our timeline." Understanding dawned on Elias. The morning's confrontation hadn't been entirely coincidental. It had been allowed to happen, monitored, used as evidence in a larger operation. He felt a flash of irritation at being used as bait, but it was quickly replaced by grudging respect for the strategy. A young soldier approached with a tablet displaying news feeds. "Sir, the footage is going viral. All major networks are running it." The screens around the room switched to various news channels, all showing the same footage. Elias kneeling on the ground, Denton's aggressive behavior, and the dramatic arrival of the military convoy. The headlines varied from "Decorated," "Veteran harassed by police" to "Military intervenes in shocking roadside stop." "And so it begins," Elias murmured, watching as his private crusade suddenly became very public. Captain Hale cleared his throat. "Sir, there's something else you should see." He nodded to another officer, who brought up a different video on the main screen. This one showed a young soldier in Iraq, surrounded by gunfire, carrying a wounded comrade through the chaos of an ambush. "That's you," Elias realized, recognizing a much younger Andrew Hale in the footage. Hale nodded. "Baghdad, 2007. I was leading a routine patrol when we were hit. Lost 3 men in the first minute." His voice remained professional, but emotion crept in around the edges. Then this man appeared out of nowhere. The video showed another figure entering the frame. Older, civilian clothes, but moving with unmistakable military precision. The man helped Hale evacuate his wounded soldiers, seemingly immune to the bullets flying around him. "You were there as a contractor," Hale continued. "Officially training local police, unofficially building what would become the forgotten line in the Middle East. You saved my life that day, and you disappeared before I could even thank you." Elias watched the footage with a distant expression. He remembered that day, one of many where he'd found himself in the wrong place at the right time. "When I finally tracked you down years later," Hale said, "I learned what happened to you after Vietnam, how they buried your testimony, stripped your rank, tried to erase you from history." His voice hardened. "That's when I started recruiting. Every soldier you ever saved, every veteran who found shelter through your network. We became your army, sir, fighting the battle you started 50 years ago." The room fell silent as the weight of Hale's words settled. Elias looked around, at the faces watching him, young and old, diverse in every way except for the shared look of respect in their eyes. "The war never ended for some of us," Elias said finally, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "We just changed battlefields." He turned back to the map showing the Forgotten Lines network, tracing one of the red lines with his finger. "Show me what Cole's been up to." As the briefing continued, the story of Elias's life unfolded through reports, surveillance footage, and testimony. How he'd built safe houses for homeless veterans while the VA failed them. How he'd trained former soldiers to advocate for themselves in a system designed to wear them down. How he'd quietly gathered evidence against corrupt officials who profited from endless wars, while soldiers came home broken and abandoned. And through it all, Derek Cole had watched and waited, seeing Elias as a threat to the comfortable status quo that kept power in the hands of those who abused it. "He's been surveilling you for years," the intelligence officer explained, bringing up files showing Elias's movements being tracked, waiting for you to make a mistake he could use to discredit you. "But you never did," Renee added, professional, admiration mixing with daughterly pride. So now he's getting desperate. Elias absorbed the information with the calm assessment of a man who'd been fighting the same enemy for decades. "The bike ride wasn't random," he admitted finally. "I knew Denton's reputation, knew he couldn't resist harassing an old black man in his jurisdiction. You let yourself be bait," Hale realized. Elias nodded. "Sometimes you let the beast bite, so the world sees its teeth." As the meeting concluded, Elias stood before the assembled soldiers and agents. Despite his age and the morning's rough treatment, his bearing was that of a commander addressing his troops. "What happens next won't be easy," he told them. "Cole will retaliate. Denton was just a pawn. There are others like him in departments across the country. But today, we showed them that we're watching too. That every veteran they harass, every right they violate, every abuse of power they think is hidden, we see it all." He glanced at Renee, a moment of understanding passing between father and daughter. "It's time to bring this fight into the light." 3 days after the confrontation, Elias sat in Renee's modest apartment, watching as the footage of his encounter with Denton played yet again on the evening news. The clip had been viewed over 50 million times online, sparking protests in major cities and a nationwide conversation about police treatment of veterans, especially those of color. "They're calling you the man who refused to kneel," Renee said, setting a cup of coffee in front of her father. "Even though you literally did kneel." "Symbolism matters more than facts these days," Elias replied, his eyes never leaving the screen. The news anchor's voice filled the room. "Officer Bradley, Denton has been suspended pending investigation, with the FBI now examining dozens of similar complaints against him. Meanwhile, Major Elias Carter has declined all interview requests, even as his story inspires growing protests nationwide." The segment cut to footage of demonstrations in front of police stations across the country, crowds holding signs with Elias's image and slogans like "Respect our veterans" and "Who's watching the watchers?" "You've become a symbol overnight," Renee observed, settling into the chair across from him. Elias finally looked away from the television, studying his daughter instead. Her law degree hung framed on the wall behind her, evidence of the path she'd chosen, fighting injustice through legal channels while he'd waged his shadow war. "Not by choice," he said finally. "Symbols make convenient targets." "Is that why you've refused protection?" Renee asked, frustration edging into her voice. "Captain Hale has a security detail on standby, but you won't even let them station someone outside." Elias sipped his coffee, the familiar argument settling between them like an old piece of furniture, worn but immovable. "I've been taking care of myself for a long time." "This is different," Renee insisted. "Cole isn't just watching anymore. That footage humiliated him, exposed an operation he's been running for years. He'll retaliate." Before Elias could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message. He checked it, his expression revealing nothing. "Your FBI friends work fast," he remarked, showing her the screen, a news alert announcing that Denton's suspension had been upgraded to termination after more evidence emerged of his misconduct. Across town, in a run-down trailer park on the outskirts of the city, Bradley Denton sat alone in the dark, illuminated only by the glow of his television screen and the ember of his cigarette. Empty whiskey bottles littered the coffee table in front of him as the same news report announced the end of his career. Terminated effective immediately, the anchor's voice declared dispassionately. Sources within the department suggest Denton had a long history of complaints, particularly regarding his treatment of minority citizens. Denton hurled his glass at the television, where it shattered against the screen. "Lying bastards," he snarled to the empty room. "You all approved every report I ever filed." His phone had been ringing nonstop since the incident, reporters, lawyers, even a few death threats. He'd stopped answering 2 days ago. Only one call had gotten through. A man with a cultured voice who'd identified himself simply as a friend with mutual interests. The stranger had asked pointed questions about Elias Carter, about the forgotten line, about the military's involvement. Denton had been drunk enough to share what little he knew, and sober enough to recognize an opportunity when the man had offered to make things right. Now, as he reached for another bottle, his phone buzzed with a text. "Meet tomorrow, 2 p.m. Coordinates attached. Come alone. DC." Denton smiled for the first time in days, a cold expression devoid of humor. "Payback time, old man," he muttered, saving the message. Morning came to a small park near Renee's apartment building. Elias sat on a bench, watching as a young black boy practiced skateboard tricks on the sidewalk nearby. The boy had been there every morning, his determined efforts to master a particular flip resulting in more falls than successes. Elias's body still ached from his encounter with Denton, but he'd refused to let it keep him inside. Routines mattered, especially when the world around you was in chaos. The boy fell again, his skateboard clattering away. This time, frustration won out, and he kicked the fallen board in anger. "Took me 3 years to rebuild my bike's transmission," Elias called out conversationally. "Broke the same part 4 times before I got it right." The boy looked up, noticing Elias for the first time. Recognition dawned in his eyes. "You're him," he said, excitement replacing frustration. "From TV. The vet they messed with." Elias nodded acknowledgement. "Elias Carter. I'm Darnell," the boy replied, retrieving his skateboard and approaching cautiously. "My grandpa was in Vietnam, too. He died last year." "I'm sorry to hear that," Elias said, genuine sympathy in his voice. Was he a happy man? The question seemed to surprise Darnell. "Yeah, I guess so." He laughed a lot, told crazy stories. A smile touched his face at the memories. "Mom says he saw bad stuff in the war, but he didn't let it make him mean." "Smart man, your grandpa," Elias remarked. "That's the hardest battle of all." They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Darnell spoke again. "Why'd that cop mess with you? Was it 'cause you're black?" The directness of youth. No filters, no political correctness. Elias appreciated the honesty. "Partly," he admitted. "But it's more complicated than that. Some people need others to be beneath them to feel tall themselves." Darnell considered this, then nodded with the wisdom of a child who'd already seen enough of the world to understand. "That's messed up." "Yes," Elias agreed simply. "It is." Their conversation was interrupted by Darnell's mother calling from a nearby apartment window. The boy waved to her, then turned back to Elias. "Can I bring you something? Like a letter or a drawing? For what you did?" Elias was taken aback by the offer, emotion briefly cracking his composed exterior. "I'd like that very much," he said finally. As Darnell raced off with his skateboard, Renee approached from the direction of her apartment building. She'd been watching the exchange from a distance, her expression thoughtful. "You're good with kids," she observed, taking a seat beside him. "You always were. They ask better questions than adults," Elias replied. Renee smiled slightly. "Like why you never came to my school plays." The old wound was delivered without heat, a statement of fact rather than an accusation. They'd moved beyond blame years ago, settling into a complicated peace built on mutual respect if not complete understanding. "I made mistakes," Elias acknowledged, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Thought I was fighting for a better world for you. Didn't realize you needed me in the world you already had. It was the closest he'd ever come to an apology. Renee reached over and briefly covered his hand with hers, a gesture of acceptance, if not forgiveness. The FBI director wants to meet, she said, changing subjects. They're preparing a RICO case against Cole and his network. Your testimony would be crucial. Elias nodded, unsurprised. And Captain Hale? He's called twice this morning. Soldiers are reporting in from across the country, veterans stepping forward to join the forgotten line now that it's becoming public. They're asking for guidance. The weight of responsibility settled across Elias's shoulders, a familiar burden he'd carried for decades. We need to move carefully, he said. Cole will be watching for any mistake, any excuse to discredit the whole movement. Their conversation was interrupted by Renee's phone. She answered, listened briefly, then handed it to Elias with a grave expression. It's Officer Morales. Elias took the phone. This is Carter. Morales's voice was tight with controlled fear. My apartment was broken into last night. Nothing taken. But they left a message, a photograph of me pinned to the wall with a knife, the word traitor written across it. Are you somewhere safe? Elias asked immediately. Yes, I'm staying with my sister, but that's not why I called. She took a deep breath. I accessed Denton's email before turning in my badge. He's been in contact with someone named Cole for months, feeding him information about local veterans, especially Black and Latino ones. Elias's expression hardened. I need everything you have. Already sent it to your daughter's secure email, Morales replied. There's something else. Denton's meeting Cole today. I have the coordinates. As Elias ended the call and relayed the information to Renee, media vans began pulling up to the park entrance. Word of his location had somehow leaked. We need to go, Renee said urgently, already on her feet. Elias stood more slowly, watching, as reporters and camera operators spilled from the vehicles. No, he said firmly. Running looks like guilt. I'll talk to them. Dad, we don't have time. Make time. He cut her off, his voice taking on the tone of command that had once directed men through battle. This is part of the fight, too. As the reporters approached, shouting questions and thrusting microphones forward, Elias stood his ground. The cameras captured his image, an elderly Black man in a Vietnam vet cap, standing straight despite his years, facing the media storm with the same calm he'd shown Denton. Major Carter, how do you respond to allegations that you staged the confrontation with Officer Denton? Major Carter, will you be filing a lawsuit against the police department? Major Carter, can you tell us about the forgotten line? Elias raised a hand, and somehow the simple gesture silenced the clamor. When he spoke, his voice was measured but carried to every microphone. I'm not here to be a symbol, he said clearly. I'm here to start a war on silence. For 50 years, I've watched veterans come home to a country that would rather forget them, especially if they're Black or brown. I've seen good police officers silenced when they try to stand against corruption. I've witnessed the powerful bury the truth to protect their own interests. He paused, making eye contact with several reporters before continuing. What happened to me happens every day to people without cameras present. The only difference is, I had an army at my back. Questions erupted again, but Elias turned away, nodding to Renee that he was ready to leave. As they walked through the crowd, a local reporter stepped directly into their path. Major Carter, the police chief has released a statement questioning your military record, citing your dishonorable discharge as evidence that you're no hero. How do you respond? Before Elias could answer, a voice called out from the crowd. My father's alive because of him. All heads turned to see an elderly white man making his way forward, leaning heavily on a cane. Tay Ninh Province, 1968, the man continued, his voice wavering with age but firm with conviction. Lieutenant Carter carried my father through enemy fire for 6 miles with a bullet in his own leg. They can rewrite the records all they want. Those of us who were there know the truth. Others began calling out similar stories. Children and grandchildren of soldiers Elias had served with, veterans who'd found housing through his network, officers he'd trained. The spontaneous testimony transformed the media ambush into something else entirely, a public reckoning with buried history. As Elias and Renee finally broke free of the crowd and made their way to her car, his phone buzzed with a message from Captain Hale. "Denton on the move. Heading to meeting point, we're tracking." Elias stared at the message for a long moment before responding. "No intervention. Let's see what Cole has planned." Renee glanced at him as she started the car. "You're using Denton as bait now?" "Sometimes," Elias said, echoing his earlier words. "You let the beast bite, so the world sees its teeth." Across town, Bradley. Denton pulled his pickup truck into an abandoned warehouse parking lot, anger and anticipation warring within him. The bitter taste of public humiliation still burned in his throat, but the promise of revenge was a soothing balm. As he stepped out of his vehicle, the distant sound of motorcycles reached his ears, dozens of them, growing louder by the second. "What the hell?" he muttered, instinctively reaching for the sidearm no longer at his hip. Around the corner of the warehouse, a procession of riders appeared, veterans on motorcycles, many displaying American flags and military insignia. They formed a circle around the parking lot, engines idling, watching him with impassive faces. And in their midst, pulling up directly in front of Denton, was a sleek black SUV with tinted windows. The rear door opened, and a well-dressed man, in his 60s, emerged, silver-haired, fit with the cold eyes of a predator. "Officer Denton," Derek Cole said smoothly, extending his hand. "I believe we have much to discuss about our mutual problem, Major Elias Carter." Dawn broke over a parking lot filled with motorcycles and veterans of all ages. Steam rose from coffee cups as Elias addressed the gathered crowd, men and women who had answered the call to join what was now being openly called the Forgotten Line Ride for Justice. What had begun as a small protest had transformed into a movement overnight. "This isn't about me," Elias told them, his voice carrying across the silent gathering. "This is about every veteran who came home to find the country they fought for had forgotten them. This is about accountability. For police who abuse their power, for officials who bury the truth, for a system that treats some citizens as less worthy of respect than others." The veterans, diverse in age, race, and background, listened with solemn attention. Many wore their old service caps or jackets. Some sat in wheelchairs. Others stood with prosthetic limbs. All shared the unmistakable bearing of those who had served. "We ride in peace," Elias continued, emphasizing each word. "We carry no weapons except the truth. Our mission is visibility, to show America the faces it tries to forget." Captain Hale stepped forward, now dressed in civilian clothes, though his military bearing remained evident. "The route will take us through 6 states, ending in D.C. We've secured permits for all planned stops. Local veteran groups will join us along the way." As the briefing continued, Renee stood to the side, phone pressed to her ear as she received updates from her FBI contacts. Her expression grew increasingly troubled as she listened. When the meeting broke up and riders began preparing their bikes, she pulled Elias and Hale aside. "Cole's been busy," she said without preamble. 3 veterans who were planning to join. The ride have been arrested in the last 12 hours. Trumped-up charges that won't stick, but enough to keep them detained. And there's chatter about a group called the Guardians of Honor, mobilizing to intercept the ride. Hale's jaw tightened. "I know them. Private militia with unofficial ties to several defense contractors. They recruit ex-military with extremist leanings." "Can you get your FBI friends to intervene?" Elias asked Renee. She shook her head. "They're building the RICO case against Cole. Direct intervention now could compromise years of work. They'll monitor from a distance, but we're on our own until Cole makes a move they can't ignore." Elias absorbed this information with the calm assessment of a man long accustomed to fighting uphill battles. "Then we proceed as planned, but double the scouts and make sure everyone understands. No engagement, no escalation." As preparations continued, a sleek silver SUV pulled into the lot. The driver, a middle-aged white man in an expensive suit, approached cautiously, his body language suggesting he wasn't entirely comfortable in the sea of veterans. Senator Williams, Hale, identified him quietly to Elias. "Chairs the Veterans Affairs Committee." The senator made his way directly to Elias, hand extended. "Major Carter," he said, his politician's smile firmly in place. I wanted to offer my personal support before you depart. What happened to you was unacceptable. Elias shook the offered hand, but remained guarded. Appreciate the sentiment, Senator, but it happens to veterans every day without cameras present. Yes, well, Williams continued smoothly. I've introduced legislation to address police accountability in interactions with veterans. We're calling it the Carter Act. Before Elias could respond, a young female veteran with a prosthetic leg stepped forward. That the same legislation you gutted last session, Senator? The one that would have increased funding for veteran mental health services? Williams's smile faltered slightly. Ms. Rivera, the budgetary constraints were. Save it, she cut him off. We've heard the excuses. You're here for a photo op, not to help. The confrontation drew attention from nearby riders, creating an uncomfortable tension. Elias placed a calming hand on Rivera's shoulder. The senator's support is welcome, he said diplomatically. As is his legislation, however belated. But this ride isn't about politics or photo opportunities. He turned back to Williams. If you want to help, Senator, start by explaining why. The VA hospital in your district has been understaffed for 3 years running. Williams's face reddened, but before he could respond, his aide whispered something in his ear. The senator checked his watch and forced another smile. I'm afraid I have another engagement. Good luck with your demonstration, Major. As the senator beat a hasty retreat, Rivera turned to Elias. Sorry if I overstepped. You didn't, Elias assured her. Politicians come and go, the fight remains. By mid-morning, the convoy was on the road, over 50 motorcycles led by Elias on his vintage bike, with support vehicles carrying supplies and riders who couldn't manage the full journey. Captain Hale rode directly behind Elias with scouts, positioned ahead and alongside the group. The first day's ride proceeded smoothly, with locals gathering along roadsides to watch the procession pass. Some waved American flags, others held signs supporting veterans or criticizing police brutality. News helicopters tracked their progress from above, broadcasting live updates on the growing movement. As they crossed into Mississippi late that afternoon, Renee called Elias during a rest stop, her voice tight with controlled urgency. Something's wrong, she said without greeting. 3 of our advance scouts haven't checked in. They were supposed to verify the route through Taylor County an hour ago. Elias signaled to Hale, who joined the call. Could be simple mechanical issues, Hale suggested, though his expression suggested he didn't believe it. All 3, Renee countered. Simultaneously? And now I'm getting reports of unusual activity along that stretch. Unmarked vehicles, communications jammers. Elias considered their options. The planned route would take them through a sparsely populated area, good for avoiding traffic complications, but potentially isolating if trouble arose. We'll reroute, he decided. Take the highway instead. More exposure, more witnesses. I'll coordinate, Hale agreed, already moving to spread the word among the riders. 20 minutes later, the convoy was back on the road, now following the more public highway route. The change seemed to have averted whatever trap might have been set, but Elias remained vigilant, constantly scanning their surroundings. His caution proved justified when, 10 miles down the highway, a deafening explosion ripped through the air. One of the veterans' bikes, 2 vehicles ahead of Elias, suddenly erupted in flames, sending its rider tumbling across the asphalt. Chaos erupted as riders swerved to avoid the wreckage. Hale's training kicked in immediately, his voice cutting through the confusion with crisp commands. Defensive perimeter, medics to the injured, security teams, assess and report. Veterans responded with military precision, forming a protective circle around the crash site, while those with medical training attended to the injured rider and his passenger. Traffic on the highway came to a standstill as civilian witnesses looked on in shock. Elias dismounted and moved swiftly to the burning motorcycle, where Rivera and another veteran were pulling the injured rider to safety. The man, Wilson, a Vietnam-era Navy veteran, was conscious but badly burned along one side. Bomb, Wilson gasped through pain. Under the seat, timed, professional job. Elias knelt beside him, helping Rivera apply pressure to a bleeding wound. Did you see anything? Anyone near your bike at the last stop? Wilson shook his head, grimacing. Nothing. But had a visitor last night. Guy claiming to be with Veteran Affairs. Asked a lot of questions about the ride. Hale approached, face grim. Another rider found this under his seat, he said quietly, showing Elias a small sophisticated device. Hasn't been activated yet. We're checking all vehicles now. Elias's expression hardened. Cole's making his move. As emergency vehicles arrived and the injured were loaded into ambulances, Elias gathered the remaining riders for a hurried conference. News crews had already appeared, cameras rolling as they captured the aftermath of the explosion. This changes things, Elias told the group. Anyone who wants to turn back, now's the time. No judgment. Not a single rider stepped away. Instead, Rivera spoke for the group. They're trying to scare us off. That means we're making them nervous. All the more reason to continue, another veteran agreed. Elias nodded, pride evident beneath his concern. We'll break into smaller groups, vary our routes, and reconvene at the safe house in Atlanta. Harder to target, harder to track. As the riders reorganized, Renee called again. This time her voice carried undisguised alarm. Dad, you need to... See this, she said, sending a file to his phone. Captain Hale discovered it in a classified database he still has access to. The document that appeared on Elias's screen was heavily redacted but clear enough. Operation details describing containment protocols for high-value domestic targets, with his name prominently featured. The authorization signature belonged to Derek Cole. He's not just trying to discredit you anymore, Renee said. This is an elimination order disguised as a security protocol. Elias showed the document to Hale, whose expression darkened. I've seen this format before, the captain confirmed. Black Ops authorization. Gives them plausible deniability if things go wrong. We need to abort the ride, Renee insisted. You're walking into a kill zone. But Elias had spotted something else in the document. A reference to primary target acquisition at Convergence Point D. He zoomed in on the partially redacted map coordinates. They're not just targeting me, he realized aloud. They're planning something at the DC rally, something big enough to discredit the entire movement. Hale studied the document and nodded grimly. False flag operation. Create violence they can blame on veterans, destroy public support in one stroke. All the more reason to continue, Elias decided, but we adapt, change the narrative. As the convoy split into smaller groups and departed, each taking different routes toward Atlanta, tensions among the younger veterans began to surface. During a refueling stop, Elias overheard a heated conversation between Rivera and several others. This is war, a former Marine was saying. They're using lethal force. We should respond in kind. We're not soldiers anymore, Rivera countered. We can't what? Defend ourselves? The Marine demanded. They just tried to kill Wilson. You want to wait until they succeed with someone else? Elias approached quietly, his presence immediately shifting the dynamic of the conversation. The veterans fell silent, some looking defiant, others uncomfortable. We should fight back, the Marine told Elias directly, unwilling to back down. We have the training, the numbers. Elias regarded him steadily. And then what? We become exactly what they're trying to paint us as. Dangerous, unstable, a threat to public safety. So we just let them pick us off? Another veteran demanded. We fight, Elias corrected. So the next generation doesn't have to. Violence is what they want from us. Proof that we're dangerous, that we need to be controlled. He looked each of them in the eye. I've seen what happens when the line between soldier and civilian blurs. We all have. That's not the victory we're after. The tension gradually dissipated, though not all seemed entirely convinced. As they prepared to continue their journey, Elias's phone rang once more. This time it was Officer Morales. My apartment was firebombed an hour ago, she said without preamble, her voice shaking slightly despite her evident attempt to remain composed. I wasn't home, but my neighbors. 3 people are in the hospital. Elias closed his eyes briefly, the weight of responsibility settling more heavily across his shoulders. I'm sorry, Morales, Don't you dare say this is your fault, She cut him off fiercely. I made my choice when I testified against Denton. But you need to know, he's completely off the grid now. His trailer was found abandoned, and according to some files I acquired from the department database, he's been in regular contact with someone matching Cole's description for months. Any idea what they're planning? Nothing specific, but there was a reference to something called Operation Cleansing Fire. Whatever it is, it's scheduled for the DC rally. As Elias ended the call and rejoined the group preparing to depart, he found Renee waiting for him. She'd flown in to coordinate with local FBI contacts and now stood beside her rental car, arms crossed, concern evident in her expression. "You're drawing them out," she said. Not a question, but a realization. This whole ride, it's not just a protest, it's bait. Elias neither confirmed nor denied, but his silence was answer enough. "Dad, these people trust you," she said, gesturing to the veterans preparing their motorcycles. "They believe in what you're doing. Do they know you're using them as part of some elaborate trap?" "They know exactly what they signed up for," Elias replied quietly. "Every one of them has been failed by the system we're fighting. They understand the risks. The question is, do you?" The challenge hung between them, not just about the immediate danger, but about the decades-long fight that had defined their relationship. Renee had always chosen to work within the system, believing it could be reformed. Elias had long ago decided the system itself was the problem. After a long moment, Renee nodded. "I understand now," she said simply. "I didn't before. I do now." Something shifted between them. A reconciliation not expressed in words but in mutual recognition. Renee stepped forward and briefly embraced her father. "Be careful," she said as she pulled away. "I'll see you in Atlanta." As the smaller convoy departed, now just 12 riders including Elias and Hale, media attention intensified. News of the bombing had spread nationwide, with commentators across the political spectrum weighing in on the veteran movement. Some outlets portrayed Elias as a hero standing against corruption. Others began running suspiciously similar stories questioning his military record, his motives, even his mental stability. Phrases like radical agenda and anti-police sentiment appeared with increasing frequency. Cole's media influence runs deep, Hale observed, as they watched a particularly negative report during another rest stop. Same talking points across multiple networks, Elias wasn't surprised. Money buys narratives, always has. Despite the increasing pressure, the ride continued to gain support. Veterans who couldn't join physically began posting video messages online, sharing their own stories of mistreatment and expressing solidarity. One retired general's statement went viral. "Elias Carter saved my life in '68. Anyone questioning his service is questioning mine." By the time the fractured convoy began to reunite in Georgia, over 300 riders had joined the movement from across the country. Local police initially attempted to block their entry into Atlanta, but relented when National Guard units, acting on orders from a sympathetic governor, arrived and waved the veterans through. 2 days later, as the expanded convoy prepared for the final leg of their journey to Washington, D.C., Elias received an urgent call from an unexpected source, the mayor of Braxton, a small industrial town along their planned route. "Major Carter," the woman's voice was professional but warm, "I understand your group will be passing through our jurisdiction tomorrow. I wanted to personally assure you of our support and offer a police escort through our town." The offer seemed genuine, but something in Hale's expression as he listened to the call on speakerphone prompted Elias to probe deeper. "That's very generous, Mayor Lewis. May I ask what prompted this offer?" "Well," she hesitated briefly, "to be frank, we've had some issues with our police department in the past. Your movement has sparked important conversations in our community. The least we can do is ensure your safe passage." After a few more minutes of conversation and details exchanged, Elias ended the call. Hale immediately voiced his concern. "Something's off. Braxton isn't even on our published route." Elias nodded. "And the mayor mentioned specific timing we haven't made public." "Trap?" Hale asked, already knowing the answer. "Almost certainly." Elias studied the map on the table before them. "The question is, Do we avoid it or spring it? Renee, who had rejoined them in Atlanta, leaned forward. The FBI has been monitoring Cole's communications. There's been a spike in activity centered around Braxton, specifically the abandoned industrial zone on the east side. Elias traced the route on the map. Remote, limited access points, poor cell coverage. Perfect for an ambush. We should bypass it entirely, Renee argued. Take the highway instead. But Elias was already formulating a different plan. No, he said finally. We go through. But we go prepared. Hours of strategic planning followed, with Hale coordinating veterans with special operations experience while Renee liaised with trusted FBI contacts. By morning, the plan was set, one that would either expose Cole's operation once and for all or lead them into disaster. The convoy departed Atlanta at dawn, now nearly 500 strong, with media helicopters tracking their progress from above. As they approached Braxton, Elias gave the signal, and the convoy split into 3 groups. The main force continued on the highway, bypassing the town entirely. A second, smaller group took a different alternate route. Only Elias, Hale, and 30 carefully selected veterans followed the invitation into Braxton, each rider now equipped with hidden cameras and emergency transmitters. They were met at the town limits by 2 police cruisers that led them toward the abandoned industrial zone. No sign of the mayor, Hale noted over their secure communication system. Just as expected. Elias nodded, his focus on their surroundings as they entered the industrial area. Decrepit warehouses loomed on either side, broken windows like empty eye sockets staring down at the procession. The road narrowed, forcing the riders into a more vulnerable single-file formation. Communications failing, one veteran reported, his voice breaking up over the radio. GPS signal jamming detected, exactly as predicted. Elias gave the prearranged hand signal, and the riders subtly activated their backup systems. Specialized military equipment Hale had secured through contacts still active in special operations. As they rounded a corner into what appeared to be a dead end, a concrete yard surrounded by abandoned buildings, the escort police cruisers suddenly accelerated away, leaving the veterans alone in the enclosed space. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then a single shot rang out, a warning fired into the ground near Elias's front tire. The veterans immediately formed a defensive perimeter, engines still running but movement halted. Drones are in position, Hale murmured over their still-functioning private channel. Broadcasting to secure military channel and Rivera's team outside the jamming radius. More shots followed. Precise fire that disabled several motorcycle tires and engines without directly targeting the riders. Professional work, designed to immobilize rather than kill, at least initially. Snipers in the east and north buildings, a veteran with combat experience reported quietly. At least 5 positions. Elias remained calm, surveying their predicament. This was the moment of greatest danger, but also opportunity. Everything depended on Cole taking personal command, on his desire to face Elias directly. As if on cue, a figure emerged from behind one of the buildings. Bradley Denton, now unshaven and wild-eyed, clutching a rifle with white-knuckled intensity. He approached the trapped convoy, weapon trained directly at Elias. "You ruined my life," he spat, rage contorting his features. "You made me the villain." Elias remained seated on his bike, hands visible, voice steady. "You did that all by yourself." Denton's finger tightened on the trigger. But before he could fire, another figure emerged from the shadows. Derek Cole, impeccably dressed despite the surroundings, his silver hair catching the sunlight. "That's enough, Officer Denton," Cole said smoothly, placing a restraining hand on Denton's shoulder. "This requires finesse." Cole approached Elias with the confident stride of a man accustomed to power. At his signal, armed men in paramilitary gear emerged from various hiding places, surrounding the veterans completely. "Major Carter," Cole greeted him, as though they were meeting at a social function rather than an ambush. "It's been a long time." "Not long enough," Elias replied evenly. Cole smiled thinly. "Still the same stubborn idealist. You could have lived out your days in peaceful obscurity. Instead, you forced my hand. Again. Like you forced it in Tynin." or when you buried evidence of war crimes to protect your superiors. Ancient history, Cole dismissed with a wave. Today is about the future, specifically yours, which is about to become very short and very violent. As Cole spoke, one of his men approached, carrying what appeared to be assault rifles and homemade explosive devices. These will be found with your bodies, Cole explained conversationally. Tragic, really. Unstable veterans, radicalized by social media, attempting a domestic terror attack thwarted by brave local police. He glanced at Denton. Officer Denton here will be hailed as a hero who gave his life stopping the threat. Denton's head snapped toward Cole, confusion replacing rage. What are you talking about? You said I'd get my job back, that we'd expose Carter as a fraud. Cole ignored him, continuing to address Elias. The narrative writes itself. Veteran extremism, the danger of anti-police sentiment, the need for stricter domestic surveillance. Your little movement dies today, along with its leader. The trap was fully sprung now, but not in the way Cole imagined. While he monologued, Hale had been systematically activating emergency signals, and the veterans had subtly repositioned themselves according to their prearranged plan. Elias checked his watch, a deliberate motion that caught Cole's attention. Expecting someone? Cole asked, amused. Your reinforcements are being intercepted as we speak. No one is coming to save you. I don't need saving, Elias replied calmly. But you might. Before Cole could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles shattered the tense standoff. Not from the road they'd entered on, but from a service entrance that Cole's men had left unguarded, a deliberate weakness in their perimeter that Hale had identified during their planning. Officer Morales emerged first, weapon drawn, live-streaming the entire scene from her body camera. Behind her came additional police officers, not from Braxton, but from neighboring jurisdictions accompanied by FBI agents in tactical gear. Federal agents, a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. Drop your weapons. Cole's composure finally cracked, his eyes darting between the new arrivals and Elias's calm expression. Understanding dawned on his face. You knew. We knew, Elias confirmed. The question is, did you really think I'd walk into your trap without setting one of my own? In the confusion, Denton made a desperate move, swinging his rifle toward Elias with murderous intent. Captain Hale reacted, instantly tackling the former officer before he could fire. The two men crashed to the ground, struggling for control of the weapon. Cole used the distraction to signal his men, who opened fire on the federal agents. Chaos erupted as the veterans took cover, protecting each other with practiced coordination. Not one of them drew a weapon, exactly as Elias had instructed. Instead, they formed a human shield around civilians who had been watching from the sidelines, local residents who had gathered out of curiosity, now caught in the crossfire. The image of unarmed veterans protecting innocent bystanders while under attack would become one of the most powerful symbols of the entire movement. Within minutes, the superior numbers and training of the federal agents overwhelmed Cole's mercenaries. One by one, they surrendered or were subdued. Cole himself attempted to escape in the confusion, but was cornered by Morales and two FBI agents. As the gunfire ceased and the area was secured, Elias finally dismounted from his bike, exhaustion evident in the stiffness of his movements. The confrontation had ended without a single veteran firing a shot, a fact that would feature prominently in every news report that followed. Denton, now in handcuffs and bleeding from his struggle with Hale, was led past Elias toward a waiting police vehicle. He stopped briefly, defeated rage still smoldering in his eyes. This isn't over, he muttered. For you it is, Elias replied simply. As federal agents took Cole into custody, reading him his rights with grim satisfaction, Elias watched with complex emotions. The man had been his nemesis for decades, first as his handler in Vietnam, then as his persecutor after the war, and finally as the architect of a conspiracy that had nearly cost numerous lives. Renee arrived with the second group of veterans, rushing to her father's side. Are you all right? Elias nodded, surveying the aftermath of the ambush, the arrested mercenaries, the evidence being collected, the media now arriving to document it all. It worked, Renee marveled, still processing their success. Every bit of it caught on camera, broadcast in real time. They can't bury this. No, Elias agreed, a weight lifting from his shoulders. Not just from today's victory, but from decades of fighting shadows. Not anymore. As medical personnel attended to minor injuries and agents secured the scene, Elias sat heavily on a concrete barrier, the adrenaline of the confrontation finally receding to leave only bone-deep weariness in its wake. Captain Hale approached, offering a bottle of water. "Sir," he said quietly, "the convoy is regrouping outside town. Over 1,000 riders waiting to escort you to D.C. Elias took a long drink before responding. "Tell them we'll be there soon." The ride continues. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting images of veterans helping local civilians to safety, of federal agents leading Cole away in handcuffs, of Elias, exhausted but unbowed, preparing to continue the journey he'd started. The trap had been sprung, but not the one Cole had intended. Instead, it had become the moment when the shadows were finally exposed to light, when decades of buried truth could no longer be denied. The footage of the Braxton ambush dominated every news channel and social media platform. Americans awoke to images of unarmed veterans shielding civilians while under fire, of Elias Carter calmly facing down armed mercenaries, of Derek Cole being led away in handcuffs. The narrative Cole had hoped to create, violent, unstable, veterans posing a threat to society, had been flipped entirely. Instead, the world witnessed veterans once again putting their lives on the line to protect others. By the time the expanded convoy reached the outskirts of Washington, D.C., their numbers had swelled to over 2,000 riders. They formed a river of motorcycles stretching for miles, American flags fluttering alongside banners bearing the words, "The Forgotten Line," and "Never Again." Police escorts from supportive jurisdictions cleared the way, lights flashing in solidarity, rather than confrontation. On the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, a crowd of over 50,000 had gathered to welcome them. As Elias led the procession down Constitution Avenue, people lined the streets, families of veterans, activists, ordinary citizens moved by what they'd witnessed. Many held signs, "Thank you for your service, then and now," and "Justice for all veterans." "They're calling you the man who refused to kneel," Captain Hale remarked as they approached the memorial, referencing the phrase that had become a rallying cry across the nation. Elias, exhausted but determined to finish what he'd started, allowed himself a small smile. "Ironic considering Denton did force me to kneel." "It's not about the physical act," Renee said, riding alongside them in a support vehicle. "It's about refusing to be broken." As the lead riders reached the memorial steps, a roar went up from the crowd. News cameras captured the moment from every angle as Elias dismounted, removing his Vietnam vet cap out of respect for the sacred space. Hale and Rivera flanked him as he slowly climbed the steps, his body showing the strain of the journey but his bearing still proud. At the top, a surprise awaited. The President of the United States, standing with a small contingent of officials and military leaders. The crowd fell silent as Elias approached the Commander-in-Chief. "Major Carter," the President said, extending his hand. "On behalf of a grateful nation, I want to thank you for your service, both in Vietnam and in the decades since. What you and your fellow veterans have done has opened many eyes, including mine." Elias shook the offered hand, his expression reserved. "Thank you, Mr. President. But I didn't do this for recognition or gratitude." "I understand that," the President replied. "Which is why I'm here to do more than offer words." He turned to face the cameras. "Today, I am signing an executive order creating a special investigative committee to examine the systematic mistreatment of veterans, particularly veterans of color, throughout our nation's history. And I am issuing a formal presidential commendation to Major Elias Carter, reinstating his honorable discharge status and returning the medals he earned through his extraordinary service." An aide stepped forward with a velvet box containing the Bronze Star and Purple Heart that had been stripped from Elias decades ago. The President opened it, offering it to Elias. "Major Carter, I would be honored if you would accept these back, along with the Medal of Freedom, Our nation's highest civilian honor. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Elias made no move to take the offered medals. Instead, he looked past the president to the veterans assembled behind him, men and women who had joined the forgotten line, who had risked everything to stand with him. "I appreciate the gesture, Mr. President," Elias said, his voice carrying across the suddenly hushed gathering, "but I must respectfully decline." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as the president's smile faltered slightly. "These medals belong on the graves of soldiers who never came home," Elias continued. "And that medal of freedom, give it to the veterans. Still sleeping under bridges, still fighting for health care, still treated as second-class citizens in the country they defended." He gestured to the assembled riders. "Give it to them. They're the ones who truly deserve recognition." The president, after a moment of surprise, nodded with newfound respect. "I understand. Perhaps we can discuss more substantive actions my administration can take." "That," Elias agreed, "would be a start." 2 weeks later, Elias sat in a congressional hearing room, facing a panel of senators investigating Cole's operations and the broader issues of veteran mistreatment. The room was packed with media and spectators as Elias delivered his testimony, calm, measured, but unflinching in its honesty. "For 50 years, he told them, I've watched as this country sends young men and women to fight its wars, then abandons them when they return broken in body or spirit. I've seen how veterans of color face additional battles just to be recognized for their service. I've witnessed how power protects itself, how truth is buried for convenience, how patriotism is used as a shield for corruption." Senators shifted, uncomfortably as Elias continued, laying bare decades of systemic failure with precise, undeniable examples. Some looked away when he described homeless veterans dying on the streets. Others wiped away tears as he recounted stories of soldiers who took their own lives after being denied care. "What happened to me on that road wasn't unique," Elias said. "The only difference was that someone was watching, someone with the power to intervene. Most veterans face their battles alone." When he finished speaking, the room remained silent for several long moments before erupting into applause. Even senators who had initially been skeptical of Elias's movement found themselves standing. Outside the hearing room, Renee waited, pride evident in her expression. "You did it, Dad. They actually listened." "Words are easy," Elias cautioned. "Action is what matters." "Then you'll be pleased to know that Denton's sentencing came through," she informed him. 20 years for attempted murder, conspiracy, civil rights violations, and hate crimes. No possibility of parole. Elias nodded, taking no joy in Denton's downfall. The man had been a symptom of a deeper disease, not its cause. "And Cole?" he asked. "The case is building. They've found evidence linking him to at least a dozen illegal operations targeting veterans, activists, and whistleblowers. His network is unraveling by the day." As they walked through the Capitol corridors, staffers and officials stopped to shake Elias's hand or simply nod in respect. The man who had once been erased from military history was now impossible to ignore. In the months that followed, the Forgotten Line transformed from a protest movement into a formal foundation, a nationwide network supporting veterans through housing programs, legal advocacy, and community building. Renee and Captain Hale co-founded it in Elias's name, with Hale taking a leave of absence from active duty to serve as its first director. "General Hale now," Elias corrected Rivera as they watched the newly promoted officer address a gathering of veterans and supporters. "He earned it," Rivera agreed. "The Pentagon knows which way the wind is blowing. Better to promote the heroes than be exposed for protecting the villains." Elias smiled slightly. Cynical, but accurate. "Learned from the best," she replied with a grin. The official ceremony promoting Andrew Hale to Brigadier General was attended by high-ranking military officials and politicians eager to associate themselves with the now popular veterans movement. Hale, in his acceptance speech, made it clear where his loyalties lay. "This promotion is an honor," he told the assembled dignitaries, "but the true honor has been serving alongside heroes like Major Elias Carter. I still serve today because of what he did in '68 and what he continues to do every day, reminding us all what service really means. Later, in a quiet moment away from the cameras, Hale confided in Elias. They offered me a star in exchange for silence, you know. Wanted me to distance myself from the more radical elements of the movement. And yet here you are, Elias observed. Here I am, Hale confirmed. Some things matter more than rank. In cities across America, new traditions began to take hold. On Memorial Day, silent walks were organized in honor of forgotten veterans, solemn processions that ended at VA hospitals and homeless shelters rather than war memorials. Murals featuring Elias's image appeared on buildings from Los Angeles to Boston, often accompanied by the phrase that had become his unintentional motto, "Know who you're talking to." Officer Morales, reinstated and promoted, became the face of police reform in her department. Her testimony against Denton had made her initially unpopular among fellow officers, but as public sentiment shifted, so did attitudes within the force. She led a new anti-corruption task force, implementing training programs based on Elias's experiences and teachings. "The cadets actually study your case now," she told him during a visit to the academy. Required curriculum on how not to approach a veteran, especially one of color. Elias raised an eyebrow. Progress, I suppose. As summer turned to fall, Elias received an invitation to address a gathering of over 10,000 soldiers and civilians at Arlington National Cemetery, the largest such assembly in decades, though he'd avoided the spotlight in recent months, preferring to let younger leaders like Rivera take center stage. He accepted this final public appearance. Standing before the sea of faces, the aging veteran removed his cap as he had that first day on the memorial steps. His voice, though softened by age, still carried with the authority of one who had earned the right to be heard. "We're not heroes because of what we did in war," he told them, his words broadcast to millions watching at home. "We're heroes because we came back and kept fighting for peace, because we refused to let trauma define us, because we stand for those who can no longer stand for themselves." He gestured to the endless rows of white headstones stretching across the hallowed ground. "Those who rest here fought for an idea that this country could live up to its highest principles. Our job is to continue that fight, not with weapons, but with truth. Not with violence, but with unwavering commitment to justice." As he concluded his address, veterans in the audience rose in silent salute, not just to Elias, but to each other, to the fallen, to the ideal they all served in their own ways. It was Elias's final public speech. The movement he'd sparked would continue without him at its center, spreading and evolving as movements must. The war he'd fought for 50 years would be carried forward by new soldiers on new battlefields. 5 years passed. Elias retired to a small lakeside cabin in northern Minnesota, far from the public eye. His days settled into peaceful routine, fishing in the early mornings, writing his memoirs in the afternoons, occasionally mentoring young activists who made the pilgrimage to visit the man whose stand had changed the country. The cabin was simple but comfortable, with a covered porch facing the water. His vintage BSA motorcycle, now fully restored, sat proudly in a small garage he'd built himself. On the walls hung no medals or commendations, but photographs, his unit in Vietnam, veterans he'd helped over the decades, Renee receiving her law degree, Hale's promotion ceremony, Rivera standing before the veterans' shelter she'd founded in Detroit. His constant companion was an aging German shepherd named Scout, rescued from a shelter years earlier. The dog followed him everywhere, seeming to understand the old soldier's need for quiet companionship without demands. Each morning, Elias would sit on the dock with a cup of coffee, Scout beside him, watching the sun rise over the still water. These moments of peace were hard-won, paid for through decades of fighting battles others refused to acknowledge. Renee visited when her schedule allowed, their relationship now healed through mutual respect and understanding. During one such visit, she found a box of letters in his desk drawer, hundreds of them, written by Elias to the families of soldiers who hadn't made it home from Vietnam. "You kept in touch with all of them?" she asked, moved by the discovery. Someone, Needed to remember their sons as more than names on a wall, Elias replied simply. The letters were eventually donated to the Smithsonian, becoming part of a national exhibit on the human cost of war, not just in lives lost, but in the burden carried by those who returned. Captain Hale, now General Hale, maintained regular contact, calling weekly to update Elias on the Foundation's work and the continuing impact of the Forgotten Line. Under his leadership, the network had helped thousands of veterans find housing, employment, and community. On a crisp autumn morning in his 80th year, Elias rose before dawn as usual. He donned his Vietnam vet cap, brewed his coffee, and settled into his favorite chair on the porch, Scout at his feet. As the first light broke over the lake, he closed his eyes, smiling slightly. When Scout's plaintive whine went unanswered, the truth became clear. Elias Carter had fought his final battle, his veteran's cap resting on his chest, his expression peaceful for perhaps the first time since Vietnam. The news of his passing led every national broadcast. The president declared a day of national mourning, with flags lowered to half-staff across the country. Schools held special assemblies to teach children about the quiet hero who had changed America's relationship with its veterans. Social media, filled with tributes from those whose lives he had touched, directly or indirectly. Renee, now a prominent civil rights attorney, received the call while in court. She finished her argument with tears streaming down her face, her voice never wavering, strength inherited from her father. General Hale coordinated with military and civilian authorities to plan a funeral befitting the man who had restored honor to so many. But it was Rivera who remembered Elias's own words years earlier. No parades, just a path forward. Following his wishes, there was no state funeral, no elaborate ceremony. Instead, over 5,000 motorcyclists gathered for the final ride, a journey carrying Elias's flag-draped casket on a specially built trailer hitched to his restored BSA, ridden by Hale. The procession traveled from Minnesota to Arlington, where Elias would be laid to rest among the brothers and sisters in arms he had fought so hard to honor. People lined the highways as the convoy passed, holding candles despite the daylight, many wearing Vietnam vet caps in tribute. Children stood with hand-drawn signs reading "Thank you, Major," and "We remember." At Arlington, a simple service was held, attended by veterans from every conflict since Vietnam, high-ranking officials, and everyday citizens touched by Elias's legacy. Renee delivered the eulogy, her voice strong despite her grief. "My father taught me that silence in the face of injustice is complicity," she told the gathered mourners. "So I will never be silent again. None of us can afford to be. His fight is now our fight, to ensure that those who serve this country are served by it in return, to guarantee that dignity and respect are given to all who earn them, to remember that the true measure of a nation is how it treats those who sacrifice for it." As the honor guard folded the flag from Elias's casket with precise, reverent movements, Scout lay beside the coffin, refusing to leave his master. The dog would eventually go home with Rivera, continuing to attend Forgotten Line events as a living connection to the man who had started it all. In the years that followed, Elias's legacy grew, rather than diminished. A bronze statue was erected in Washington, D.C., depicting him standing firm with one hand on his motorcycle, the other offering a salute. The inscription read simply, "For those who came back to keep fighting." The Forgotten Line became a permanent institution, with chapters in every state advocating for veteran rights and welfare. Each year on Elias's birthday, they marched in full gear, planting flags in areas where veterans still struggled, a visible reminder of promises yet to be fulfilled. A decade after Elias's passing, the annual memorial ride was led by a young black boy, Darnell, now a teenager, wearing Elias's own cap, gifted to him by Renee. The banner flying behind him proclaimed, "We ride because he walked alone first." In Renee's office, among awards and degrees, hung a simple framed photograph, Elias smiling, standing proudly beside his vintage motorcycle. The caption beneath it captured the essence of the man who had changed so many lives. He never wanted a parade, just a path. And in towns and cities across America, when young people asked about the man in the murals, The veterans who heard the question would smile and begin the story the same way. Let me tell you about Elias Carter, a man who refused to kneel, who taught us all to stand. What would you have done if someone had humiliated your father, your brother, your friend who fought for this country? Share your thoughts in the comments. Like this video to honor veterans like Elias Carter, and subscribe for more powerful stories that make us question who we truly respect in America.